You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. My name is Reid, and I'm recording this on my phone at 4:47 AM, sitting in my car outside the Buc-ee's on Highway 287, 43 miles east of Amarillo. My hands won't stop shaking. The steering wheel feels cold under my palms, and I can taste copper in my mouth like I've been biting my tongue for hours. I need to tell someone what happened before I lose my nerve, before I convince myself it was all in my head, before the sun comes up and makes this all seem like a bad dream. 3 weeks ago, I walked into this place for what I thought was a normal job interview. I'd been driving through the Texas Panhandle, heading nowhere in particular, when I saw the now hiring sign blazing in red neon against the endless blue sky. The Buc-ee's travel center rose from the desert like a mirage, a massive complex of glass and steel that seemed to go on forever in both directions. The manager, Carol Reeves, was a weathered woman in her 50s with calloused hands and deep lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent watching this stretch of highway. Her office was small and cramped, tucked behind the customer service counter, with windows that looked out over the store floor. From there you could see the entire operation, the endless rows of merchandise, the food service area with its famous barbecue counter, the gas pump stretching out like a small city under the brutal Texas sun. She hired me on the spot after asking only a handful of questions. No background check, no references, no drug test, just a firm handshake and a start date. It seemed unusual for any place, but especially for an operation this size. During the day, thousands of travelers stopped here. Families on cross-country road trips, truckers hauling freight between coasts, tour buses filled with retirees, locals from nearby towns stocking up on Buc-ee's famous brisket and kolaches. The parking lot was a constant river of license plates from every state, a crossroads where America met for fuel and snacks before disappearing back into the vastness of Texas. But at night, Carol explained, it was different. The day shift handled the crowds, the chaos, the endless stream of customers. The night shift was quieter, she said, more contemplative. Night shift's different here, she said, sliding a sealed manila envelope across her desk. The paper was thick, expensive, and my name was written on it in careful block letters. Don't open this until your first night. Follow everything inside exactly. Some folks think they can improvise, think they know better than people who have been doing this for years. She paused, staring out at the endless stretch of desert highway where heat mirages still danced even as the sun was setting. We've had 17 night shift workers in the past 5 years. You'll be 18. The way she said it made my stomach clench. Not 17 people who had worked here and moved on to better jobs. 17 who had been here. Past tense. Final. I should have asked what happened to the other 17. I should have demanded details, insisted on meeting some of the day shift workers, called references, done any of the normal things a person does when accepting a job. Instead, I shook her hand and said I'd see her Monday night. Her grip was firm, but her palm was cold, despite the 100-degree heat outside. The weekend passed slowly. I found a cheap motel in Amarillo and spent 2 days exploring the city, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest after that interview. Amarillo was bigger than I'd expected, a sprawling hub of agriculture and commerce in the middle of nowhere. But it felt temporary somehow, like a place people passed through rather than a place they stayed. Maybe that's why the night shift job appealed to me. I'd been passing through places for months now, never staying anywhere. long enough to put down roots. Monday at 11:45 p.m, I sat in my car in the Buc-ee's parking lot and opened that envelope. Inside was a handwritten list on yellow legal paper, the kind lawyers use for important documents. The ink was slightly smeared in places, as if the writer's hand had been shaking, and there were small stains on the paper that looked like coffee rings or something darker. The title read Night Shift Protocols, Mandatory Compliance, in careful capital letters, and below it were 10 rules that would change my life forever. Rule 1. The Icee machines must run continuously between midnight and 5 a.m, even if they're broken or empty. If any machine stops making noise, pour exactly 1 cup of warm water into the drain at the base. Never use cold water. The temperature difference is important. Rule 2. Every 90 minutes, walk the perimeter of the store counterclockwise, starting from the front entrance. Count your steps out loud. If you lose count or skip a number, start over immediately, no matter how far you've walked. The count must be consistent every night. Rule 3. The payphone by the restrooms will ring exactly 4 times, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. Answer on the 4th ring. Say only, Buc-ee's night shift. Listen to whatever response you get, then hang up. Never speak again during these calls, no matter what you hear. Rule 4. Keep all the Buc-ee's merchandise facing forward, on the shelves. If you find any items turned backward, turn them around. But do not look at the back of the packaging. Avert your eyes completely. Some things are not meant to be seen. Rule 5. The coffee station timer is set to brew fresh coffee every 30 minutes. If it brews off schedule, dump the entire pot immediately and start a new batch. Do not taste the off-schedule coffee under any circumstances. Dispose of it in the designated sink only. Rule 6. Section 7, where we keep the automotive supplies, must be swept every 2 hours. If you find anything that doesn't belong there, coins, jewellery, photographs, personal items, place them in the lost and found box immediately. Do not examine them closely. Do not try to determine their origin. Rule 7. The security monitors will occasionally show static on camera 9, which covers the northeast corner of the parking lot. When this happens, announce over the PA system, "Attention, parking lot maintenance in progress." Make this announcement exactly 3 times 60 seconds apart. Do not deviate from this timing. Rule 8. If any customer asks about purchasing items from the employee section, tell them those items are not for sale and direct them to regular merchandise. There is no employee section in our store. This is not a mistake or confusion on their part. Rule 9. The walk-in cooler door must remain propped open with the yellow wedge between 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. If the wedge moves or disappears, retrieve it immediately and resume proper positioning. Never enter the cooler during this hour, regardless of what you might hear from inside. Rule 10. Clean the beaver mascot statue by the entrance every night at exactly 3 a.m. with the blue microfiber, cloth only. If the statue appears to have moved from its base, do not clean it that night. Leave it until morning shift arrives. Document any movement in the logbook. At the bottom of the page, in different handwriting that looked more hurried and desperate, someone had scrawled, "They're not suggestions. Follow them exactly or join us. Danny R. Night shift 2019 to 2020 inches." Below that, in yet another hand, someone had added, "Danny was a good kid, lasted longer than most. Beth K. 2020 to 2021 inches. And below that, Beth made it 4 weeks, new record. Carlos M. 2021 to 2022 inches. The notes continued down the margin, a roll call of the lost, each entry shorter and more desperate than the last. The final entry, in shaky handwriting that looked like it had been written in the dark, simply said, "Don't trust the silence. Anonymous." I sat in my car for another 15 minutes reading and rereading the rules. They seemed like elaborate pranks, the kind of thing veteran employees might cook up to mess with the new guy. But something about the handwriting, about the way Carol had looked at me during the interview, about the careful way she'd sealed that envelope, suggested this wasn't a joke. At exactly midnight, I walked through the front doors of the Buc-ee's and officially began what would be the worst 3 weeks of my life. The store at night was a completely different creature than during the day. Gone were the crowds, the chatter of families, the constant movement of people flowing through the aisles like water through a maze. Instead, there was space, vast, echoing space that seemed to stretch impossibly far in every direction. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sound like distant machinery, and the refrigeration units provided a constant bass note that you felt in your chest, more than heard with your ears. My first night, I treated the rules like an elaborate practical joke. Carol seemed too serious, too intense for something so ridiculous. But the moment I stepped into that store at midnight, with nothing but the hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of highway traffic, I felt it. The weight of watching eyes, the sense that I wasn't alone in that cavernous space. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be, pooling in corners where the light didn't quite reach, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I cared to admit. The Icee machines ran normally that first night, their mechanical churning oddly comforting in the silence. There were 3 of them lined up against the wall near the fountain drinks, cherry, blue raspberry, and Coca-Cola flavoured. The sound they made was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like mechanical breathing. I found myself listening to them throughout the night, using their steady hum as an anchor point in the strange new world of the overnight shift. My first perimeter walk began at 1:30 a.m. I started at the front entrance by the massive Buc-ee's sign and the beaver mascot statue, and began walking counterclockwise around the store's interior. The route took me past the clothing section with its endless racks of t-shirts and hoodies, through the food aisles with their towering displays of chips and candy, around the automotive section with its motor oil and road atlases, past the restrooms and the payphone, through the gifts and souvenirs section with its carved wooden signs and ceramic armadillos, and finally back to the front entrance. I counted each step out loud, my voice echoing strangely in the empty space. 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers became a rhythm, a cadence that seemed to match the humming of the Icee machines. By the time I completed the circuit, I had taken exactly 847 steps. Something about that number felt significant, though I couldn't say why. I wrote it down in the margin of the rules sheet along with the time, 1:47 a.m. Tuesday night brought my first real test of the rules. At 1:17 a.m, the payphone rang. The sound was shrill and unexpected in the quiet store. 4 rings that seemed to echo from every surface. I approached it cautiously, remembering Rule 3. Answer on the 4th ring. Say only, Buc-ee's night shift. Listen, then hang up. The phone was old, probably installed when the store first opened, with a heavy black handset that felt substantial in my grip. I answered on the 4th ring, exactly as instructed. Buc-ee's night shift, I said. The voice that replied was a child's voice, high and sweet, but with an underlying quality that made my skin crawl. Is my daddy there? He said he'd come back for me. He said he was just going to get gas and some snacks, but that was a long time ago. Is he there? Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to comfort this lost child, to ask questions about where she was and how I could help. But Rule 3 was clear. Never speak again during the call. I listened to her breathing on the other end of the line, small and scared and alone, until the connection went dead. I stood there holding the receiver for 10 minutes afterward, my heart hammering against my ribs, before finally hanging up. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, oppressive in a way that made me understand why the Icee machines needed to keep running. Without their constant mechanical breathing, the store would have been unbearably quiet. Wednesday brought my first encounter with Rule 4. I was restocking the snack aisles around 2 a.m. when I noticed something odd in aisle 12. A package of beef jerky had been turned around so that only the plain cardboard backing was visible. It was a small thing, easily missed, but something about it made my stomach clench with anxiety. Following Rule 4, I reached out to turn it around, but as I did, I caught just a glimpse of what was printed on the back before forcing myself to look away. Instead of the usual nutrition facts and ingredients list, there was a photograph. A little girl standing beside a car on a desert highway, her face pale and her eyes too large for her head. She was wearing a sundress that looked decades out of style, and behind her, barely visible in the background, was the unmistakable outline of the Buc-ee's travel centre. But when I looked again, steeling myself to examine it properly, it was just a normal package with normal printing. Nutrition facts, ingredients, a barcode. Nothing unusual at all. Thursday night, I experienced my first coffee incident. The machine was set to brew every 30 minutes, right on schedule, but at 2:43 a.m, it began its cycle 7 minutes early. I watched the dark liquid drip into the pot and immediately knew something was wrong. The coffee was darker than it should have been, almost black, with an oily sheen on the surface that reflected the fluorescent lights in strange patterns. Following Rule 5, I dumped the entire pot without hesitation and started a fresh batch. As the liquid swirled down the designated sink, it left a residue that looked more like tar than coffee grounds. The smell that rose from the drain was acrid and chemical, making my eyes water and my throat burn. By Friday, I was starting to understand the rhythm of the place, the strange clockwork that governed the overnight hours. The coffee brewed off schedule twice more that week, each time producing liquids that shouldn't have been possible from a normal coffee machine. Once it was pale as tea, almost clear, with particles floating in it that moved independently of any current. Another time, it was bright red, the colour of fresh blood, and when I dumped it, steam rose from the sink like incense. While sweeping Section 7 on Friday night, I found my first lost item, a small silver locket half hidden behind a display of motor oil. It was tarnished with age, the kind of thing someone might have worn decades ago. Following Rule 6, I placed it in the lost and found box without examining it closely, but as I carried it across the store, I swear I heard it ticking like a watch. The sound was rhythmic and mechanical, perfectly in sync with my heartbeat. The weekend brought my first encounter with Camera 9. I was monitoring the security feeds around 1:55 a.m. when the screen covering the northeast corner of the parking lot dissolved into static. Grey and white snow danced across the monitor, the image fracturing into 1,000 tiny dots of light and shadow. Following Rule 7, I made my announcement over the PA system. Attention, parking lot maintenance. In progress. My voice echoed through the empty store, bouncing off the high ceiling and the endless rows of merchandise. I waited exactly 60 seconds, watching the clock on the register, then made the announcement again, and again 60 seconds later. Just as I finished the third announcement, the static cleared. The parking lot looked normal again, empty except for my car and a few trucks belonging to drivers sleeping in their cabs. But, for just a moment, right before the image stabilized, I thought I saw shapes moving in that corner. Tall figures that seemed to bend wrong in the middle, like shadows cast by something that wasn't there. The second week began with an escalation that left me questioning my sanity. The payphone calls came with clockwork precision now, always at the same times, 1:17 a.m, 2:33 a.m, 3:14 a.m, and 3:58 a.m. 4 calls per night, each one different but all carrying the same weight of loss and confusion. The first call was always the child looking for her daddy. She never said anything different, never varied her words, but each night her voice seemed a little more distant, a little more faded, as if she was calling from farther and farther away. The second call was an elderly woman with a slight accent, maybe Mexican or Central American, asking about bus schedules to a town called Esperanza. I'd grown up in Texas, lived here most of my life, but I'd never heard of any town by that name. When I looked it up later, I found that Esperanza was Spanish for hope, but no such town existed on any current map of Texas. The third call was always the most disturbing. A man's voice, middle-aged and shaking, describing a car accident in vivid detail. He would talk about twisted metal and broken glass, about a family of 4 who'd been travelling to visit relatives, about how the impact had thrown one of the children clear of the wreckage. His voice would break as he asked if anyone had called for help yet, if the ambulances were on their way, if there was anything he could do. The fourth and final call was just breathing. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that lasted exactly 2 minutes before the line went dead. But it wasn't empty breathing. There was intelligence behind it, awareness, as if someone was listening as carefully to me as I was listening to them. The coffee machine's malfunctions became more frequent and more bizarre. Tuesday night, it brewed off schedule 6 times. Each pot was a different colour and consistency, ranging from the pale tea-like liquid to something that looked like melted copper. One pot produced a substance that was perfectly clear but somehow darker than water, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Another time, the liquid that came out was thick and viscous, with a consistency like honey, but a colour like motor oil. The backward merchandise multiplied exponentially during the second week. Every night I'd find 10, 15, sometimes 20 items turned around. They appeared in different sections: snacks, souvenirs, automotive supplies, but always with that same plain cardboard backing. And always, when I caught glimpses of what was printed on the reverse, something that shouldn't have been there. A missing person poster with a photo of a young man in a Buc-ee's uniform, his smile bright and genuine under the fluorescent lights of the store. A newspaper clipping about a highway accident from 1987, the headline reading, "Family of 4 dies in late-night crash near Amarillo." A child's drawing done in crayon, showing stick figures beside a crashed car, with the words, "Daddy will come back," written in shaky letters at the bottom. Each image was different, but they all shared common elements. The highway, the store, the sense of loss and waiting that seemed to permeate every corner of the building after midnight. Wednesday night of the second week brought my most unsettling discovery yet. While sweeping Section 7, I found a wallet wedged behind a display of windshield wiper fluid. It was made of brown leather, worn and creased with age, and when I opened it to check for identification, my blood ran cold. Inside was my own driver's license, not a copy or a fake, but the actual license I carried in my own wallet. Except the photo showed me standing in this exact store, wearing the Buc-ee's uniform I hadn't received yet when the photo was supposedly taken. The date on the license was wrong too. It showed I'd renewed it 6 months in the future, on a date that hadn't happened yet. But that wasn't the strangest part. The address listed on the license wasn't my apartment in Amarillo. It was 2847 Highway 287 East, which was the exact address of the Buc-ee's travel centre. I checked my own wallet immediately. My license was still there, exactly where it should be, with the correct photo and date and address. But the one I'd found was identical in every way except for those crucial details. I placed it in the lost and found box with trembling hands, but not before noticing that the signature on the back didn't quite match my own handwriting. It was close but subtly different, as if written by someone who had studied my signature but couldn't quite replicate it perfectly. Thursday brought the beaver statue incident. Every night at 3 a.m, I was required to clean the mascot statue by the front entrance with the blue microfiber cloth. It was a simple task that usually took less than 5 minutes. The statue was about 4 feet tall, carved from what looked like fiberglass, and painted in the familiar Buc-ee's colours. During the day, children would pose with it for photos, their parents snapping pictures to commemorate their stop at Texas's most famous travel centre. But when I approached it at 3 a.m. on Thursday night, I stopped dead in my tracks. The statue had moved. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough that I could tell something was different. The head was turned slightly to the right instead of straight ahead, and the painted smile seemed wider than I remembered, more knowing somehow. The eyes, which had always been directed toward the highway, now seemed to be looking directly at me. Rule 10 was clear about this situation. If the statue appears to have moved, do not clean it. Leave it until morning shift arrives. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the beaver's painted face, and retreated to the safety of the service counter. From there, I could still see the statue in my peripheral vision, and I swear it continued to track my movements throughout the rest of the night. Friday of the second week brought the worst camera, 9 incident yet. The static began at the usual time, 1:55 a.m, but instead of lasting a few minutes, it continued for nearly 20 minutes. The white noise seemed to pulse and shift, occasionally resolving into shapes that almost looked familiar before dissolving back into chaos. When the image finally cleared, the parking lot looked fundamentally different. The light poles were in the wrong positions, casting shadows that fell at impossible angles. The painted lines on the asphalt had been rearranged into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, shapes that seemed to twist and fold in on themselves in ways that defied three-dimensional space. And standing right in the centre of it all, barely visible in the security lighting, was a figure in a Buc-ee's uniform. It was waving at the camera with slow, mechanical precision, the movement too regular to be human. Its face was obscured by shadow, but something about its posture, about the way it held itself, seemed familiar. As I watched, other figures began to emerge from the shadows at the edges of the parking lot. All of them wore the same uniform. All of them moved with the same mechanical precision. They formed a rough circle around the first figure, and together they began to walk in a counterclockwise pattern, their steps perfectly synchronized. I counted their steps under my breath, unable to stop myself. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time they completed their circuit, they had taken exactly 847 steps, the same number as my nightly perimeter walk. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the scene returned to normal. Empty parking lot, proper lighting, painted lines in their correct positions. Just my car and the sleeping truckers. Nothing unusual at all. By the time I started my third week, I was barely sleeping during the day. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that payphone ringing. 4 shrill notes that had become the soundtrack to my nightmares. I'd wake up at odd hours, counting steps, muttering 837, 838, 839 inches under my breath until my roommate at the motel finally asked if I was having some kind of breakdown. How could I explain that I was counting the steps of a walk I took every 90 minutes in an empty store? That those numbers had become more real to me than the daylight world? How could I tell him about the voices on the phone, the backward merchandise, the coffee that brewed in colours no coffee should be? The rules were becoming harder to follow, not because they were complicated, but because the store itself seemed to be fighting back. The yellow wedge that propped open the cooler door during the designated hour would disappear every night, forcing me to search for it in increasingly strange places. I'd find it inside the cash register drawer, taped under tables, once even suspended from the ceiling by what looked like fishing line, spinning slowly in the air conditioning current like a hypnotist's pendulum. The Icee machines started their rebellion on Monday of the third week. All three stopped working simultaneously at 1:20 a.m., their constant mechanical humming suddenly absent. The silence they left behind was deafening, oppressive in a way that made my skin crawl and my hands shake. Without their background noise, the store felt wrong, like a body without a heartbeat. Following Rule 1, I poured warm water into each drain, measuring the temperature carefully to make sure it wasn't too hot or too cold. But they remained silent, unresponsive to my attempts to restart them. The store felt fundamentally wrong without their constant mechanical breathing. Too quiet, too expectant, like a held breath or a pause before a scream. At 1:45 a.m, they all roared back to life at once, so loud that the windows rattled, and I thought my eardrums might burst. The sound was overwhelming, like standing inside a jet engine, and I had to cover my ears until it subsided to normal levels. But even after the volume returned to normal, something was different about the sound they made. There was a rhythm to it now, a pattern that almost sounded like Morse code or some other form of communication. Tuesday night brought an encounter that shook me more than anything else so far. A customer came in at 2:15 a.m, which was unusual but not unheard of. He was a middle-aged man wearing a trucker hat, jeans, and a flannel shirt. Looked like any of the dozens of travellers who stopped here every day. He browsed the aisles for about 20 minutes, picking up items and putting them back, occasionally glancing in my direction with what looked like curiosity. Finally, he approached the counter with a Buc-ee's t-shirt in his hands. It was a standard souvenir shirt, the kind thousands of people bought every day, with the beaver mascot and "Everything's bigger in Texas" printed across the front. He set it on the counter and smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Nice night for working, isn't it?" he said, and his voice was friendly, conversational. "Quiet out here, peaceful." I nodded and began ringing up his purchase, but before I could finish, he leaned forward slightly and asked, "Say, would it be possible to buy something from the employee section? I saw some items back there that caught my eye." Rule 8 was crystal clear about this situation, so I followed it exactly. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no employee section in our store. All our merchandise is displayed in the regular sections throughout the building. Is there anything specific I can help you find?" His expression grew puzzled, then concerned. He turned and pointed toward the back wall of the service counter area, behind where I was standing. "Son, are you feeling all right? There's a whole store back there behind you. Shelves going back further than I can see. All kinds of interesting things for sale." I kept my eyes on him, fighting every instinct to turn and look. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can only sell items from our regular inventory. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight?" He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face as if looking for signs of illness or deception. "You really can't see it, can you?" he said finally, his voice filled with something that might have been pity. "That's probably for the best. Some folks aren't ready for what's back there." He left the t-shirt on the counter and walked out without another word. I watched his truck disappear down the highway, its taillights swallowed by the darkness, before I finally allowed myself to turn around. Behind the counter, where there had always been just a plain white wall, with employee notices and safety regulations, shelves now stretched back into shadows so deep I couldn't see where they ended. The shelves were packed with merchandise, but not the kind we sold in the regular store. These were items I didn't recognize, things that seemed to shift and blur when I tried to focus on them directly. There were books written in languages that hurt my eyes to look at, their covers bound in materials I couldn't identify. Jars filled with liquids that moved independently of gravity, swirling in patterns that defied physics. Photographs in frames that showed scenes I'd never witnessed, but somehow remembered. Faces of people I'd never met, but felt I should know. And walking between the aisles, shopping with the slow, deliberate movements of people who had all the time in the world, were figures in Buc-ee's uniforms. They moved like sleepwalkers, picking up items and examining them with the careful attention of serious collectors. Their faces were pale and distant, and when they occasionally glanced in my direction, their eyes held no recognition, no awareness of my presence. I closed my eyes tightly, counted to 10, and when I opened them, it was just a wall again. Plain white paint, employee notices, the same motivational poster about customer service that had been there since my first night. But I could still smell something lingering in the air, a scent like old paper and forgotten places. Wednesday started wrong from the moment I arrived at work. Carol was still there at midnight, which had never happened before in my 3 weeks on the job. She was sitting in her office with the lights off, staring out at the parking lot through the window. Her silhouette was perfectly still against the glow of the security lights, so motionless she might have been carved from stone. "You're doing good, Marcus," she said without looking at me, her voice carrying an odd note of sadness that I'd never heard before. "Better than most. You've got discipline, follow instructions. That's important in this job." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with red wax instead of the usual clear tape. The wax had been pressed with some kind of seal, leaving an impression that looked almost like the Buc-ee's beaver logo, but subtly wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate it from memory. "Additional protocols," she said, handing me the envelope. "Just for tonight. Things have been active lately. The store's been trying to communicate more directly." "What do you mean, communicate?" I asked, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Open it when you need to," she said. "You'll know when that time comes." "And Marcus?" She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were sadder than I'd ever seen them. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. None of us did." "What happened to the others?" I asked. "The 17 before me?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking back out at the parking lot. "They're still here," she said finally. "In a way. The store doesn't like to let go of its employees, especially the good ones." When I looked up to ask what she meant, Carol was gone. Her office was empty, keys still on the desk where she'd left them, but no sign of her anywhere. I called her name, checked the parking lot, even looked in the restrooms and storage areas, but she had vanished as completely as if she'd never been there at all. The night progressed according to its now familiar pattern, but everything felt more intense, more urgent. The payphone calls came right on schedule, but the voices seemed clearer, more desperate. The child looking for her daddy spoke for longer than usual, describing the car they'd been travelling in, the snacks they planned to buy, how long she'd been waiting by the highway for him to come back. The elderly woman, asking about buses to Esperanza, gave me more details this time. She needed to get there before sunrise, she said, because her granddaughter was waiting for her. The girl was scared and alone, and if she didn't arrive soon, something terrible would happen. Could I please check the schedule one more time? Could I please help her find a way home? The man describing the accident spoke with increasing panic about the family in the crashed car, about how no one had stopped to help, about how the little girl was still crying in the back seat. Why wasn't anyone coming? Why couldn't anyone hear them? The final call, the one with just breathing, lasted longer than usual. Nearly 5 minutes of slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations, and toward the end, I could swear I heard whispered words mixed in with the breathing. Names, maybe, or places, fragments of conversations I couldn't quite understand. I found more backward merchandise than ever before, dozens of items scattered throughout the store. The images on the reverse sides were becoming more specific, more personal. I saw photographs of the store itself, but from angles that shouldn't have been possible, showing areas that didn't exist in the current layout. I saw newspaper clippings about accidents and disappearances dating back decades, all connected to this stretch of highway. I saw children's drawings that depicted the store as a mouth, with rows of shelves like teeth and a darkness that stretched down into an endless throat. The coffee machine malfunctioned constantly throughout the night, brewing every few minutes in colours and consistencies that defied explanation. Some of the liquids seemed to glow with their own internal light. Others were so dark they absorbed the fluorescent lighting, creating patches of shadow that hurt to look at directly. One pot produced something that looked like liquid mercury, flowing and pooling in ways that suggested it was alive. Camera 9 showed static for hours at a time, and when it cleared, the parking lot continued to display impossible configurations. Sometimes the building itself looked different, with additional wings and levels that stretched in directions that shouldn't have existed. Sometimes there were vehicles in the lot that I hadn't seen arrive, cars from decades past, with license plates from states that had changed their designs years ago, and always the figures in uniforms, walking their endless counterclockwise circuits, counting steps that matched my own nightly routine. Exactly. At 3:27 a.m, while I was in the middle of my scheduled perimeter walk, everything changed. I was passing through the automotive section, just finishing counting step 623, when every sound in the store suddenly stopped. The Icee machines went silent mid-churn. The refrigerators stopped their constant humming. The coffee makers' burbling ceased. The fluorescent lights stopped their electrical buzzing. Even the highway noise, the distant sound of trucks and cars that had been the constant backdrop to every night, faded to complete silence. The only sounds left were my own breathing and the echo of my footsteps on the polished floor, each step ringing out like a gunshot in the absolute quiet. I remembered the envelope Carol had given me, the one with the red wax seal. My fingers trembled as I opened it, breaking the seal that had seemed so important just hours earlier. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one new rule written in red ink that seemed to shimmer and move under the fluorescent lights. Rule 11. If the store becomes completely silent, no machines running, no highway noise, no electrical humming, immediately exit through the rear emergency door. Do not collect your belongings. Do not clock out. Do not attempt to complete your remaining tasks. Run to your car and drive away. Do not look back at the building. Do not return. Ever. Below that, in Carol's careful handwriting, was a personal note. Marcus, if you're reading this, it means the store has decided it's time. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner, but some things can only be learned through experience. The 17 before you all reached this moment. Some followed the rule. Others didn't. The ones who didn't are still here, still working, still following their routines. You have maybe 5 minutes before the silence becomes permanent. Use them wisely. Carol. Rule 11 was clear, and Carol's note made the stakes obvious. I should have run for the rear exit immediately. Should have sprinted through the storage areas and burst through the emergency door into the Texas night without looking back. But I hesitated. Just for a moment, just long enough to wonder if this was some kind of test. If breaking the routine now would be worse than following the new rule. That hesitation cost me everything. In the perfect silence, I began to hear things that shouldn't have been possible. My own voice, distant and hollow, calling out numbers from somewhere deep in the store. 624, 625, 626. Then another voice, older and rougher, also counting steps. 627, 628, 629. More voices joined in. A chorus of night shift workers all counting the same perimeter walk I'd been taking for 3 weeks. I recognized some of the voices from the payphone calls. The man who described the accident was counting too, his voice breaking on every 10th number. The elderly woman, asking about buses to Esperanza, was there, her accented voice mixing Spanish and English as she counted. Even the child looking for her daddy was part of the chorus, her sweet voice barely audible above the others. 635, 636, 637. They were all still here, all still working, all still following the routines that had become their eternal prison. I ran for the back exit then, but something was fundamentally wrong with the building's geometry. The hallway that should have led straight to the emergency door seemed to stretch with every step I took. The door was always visible under its red exit sign, but it never got any closer. Behind me, I could hear my own footsteps echoing, but they were out of sync with my running, as if someone else was following the same path, just seconds behind me. The walls began to change as I ran. The employee notices and safety posters were replaced by missing person flyers, dozens of them. Faces of young men and women in Buc-ee's uniforms staring out from photocopied pages. I recognized some of them from the backward merchandise, from the newspaper clippings, from the photographs I'd been ordered, never to examine too closely. Danny R. from the handwritten note on the original rules. Beth K., who had lasted 4 weeks. Carlos M., who had made it through the summer of 2021. All the names from the margins of that yellow legal paper, all the faces from the employee section that wasn't supposed to exist. And at the end of the hallway, still impossibly far away despite my desperate running, I could see new flyers being printed and posted in real time. Fresh faces, new names, but all wearing the same uniform, all with the same expression of confused resignation. The last flyer I saw before the hallway began to dissolve around me showed my own face, taken from a security camera angle I'd never noticed. Below the photo, in the same careful printing as all the others, was my name and the dates of my employment. Marcus Reid, Night Shift 2, 025, ongoing. I don't remember how I got outside. I don't remember the transition from that endless hallway to the parking lot, from the fluorescent maze to the open Texas sky. But I'm here now, sitting in my car with the keys in my hand and the engine running, staring at the building that held me prisoner for 3 weeks. Inside, I can see lights moving in the familiar pattern of the perimeter walk. Multiple figures in Buc-ee's uniforms, all following the same route I walked every 90 minutes, all counting their steps in voices that carry through the glass doors. They pass by the windows in perfect synchronization, their movements mechanical and precise, following routines that have become more real than life itself. The Icee machines are running again. I can hear their mechanical breathing from here, that rhythmic churning that anchored every night shift. The payphone is ringing, 4 shrill notes that seem to call to me even through the car windows. Someone needs to answer it. Someone always answers it. My phone battery is dying and the recording timer shows 47 minutes and 32 seconds. Dawn is still hours away, and I should go back to my motel, should pack my things and drive as far from this place as possible. But my hands keep reaching for the door handle, wanting to go back inside and finish my shift properly. There are still 2 hours left on my schedule. The beaver statue needs to be cleaned at 3 a.m. The cooler door needs its yellow wedge repositioned. Section 7 needs to be swept. And I'm sure there are more lost items waiting to be found and catalogued. The routine has become part of me, and breaking it feels like tearing away pieces of my own identity. The sun will come up eventually, and the day shift will arrive to find the store empty again, just as they have 17 times before. They'll put up new help wanted signs, and someone else will respond to the advertisement. Someone who needs a job and doesn't ask too many questions about the turnover rate. Carol will interview them in her small office behind the customer service counter, and she'll hand them a sealed envelope with instructions not to open it until their first night. She'll tell them that night shift is different, more contemplative, and she'll mention in passing that they'll be the 19th person to take this position. The new employee will think it's strange, but they'll need the money, and the hours will seem manageable. They'll open the envelope at 11:45 p.m. on their first night and read 10 rules that will seem like elaborate pranks, jokes designed to haze the new guy. But they'll follow the rules anyway because something about the store at night will make them feel watched, observed, evaluated. They'll count their steps during the perimeter walk, answer the payphone when it rings, pour warm water into the Icee machine drains when the mechanical breathing stops. They'll find backward merchandise and turn it around without looking, dump off scheduled coffee without tasting it, clean the beaver statue with the designated blue cloth. And after 3 weeks, when they've learned the rhythm and fallen into the routine, when the rules have become second nature and the numbers have become more real than the daylight world, they'll find themselves standing in perfect silence, holding a red envelope with one final rule, written in ink, that seems to move and shimmer in the fluorescent light. Some will run, some will hesitate, some will join the eternal night shift, walking their endless counterclockwise circuits, counting steps that will never lead them home. The recording is ending now. My phone is almost dead, and the first hints of false dawn are touching the eastern horizon. I should drive away. I should leave this place and never look back. Should find a new job in a new town where the rules make sense and the night shift ends when the sun comes up. But I can hear them calling me from inside the store. 17 voices, maybe 18 now, all counting in perfect unison. 845, 846, 847. The end of the circuit. The moment when the counter resets and the walk begins again. Someone needs to maintain the rhythm. Someone needs to answer the phone when it rings. Someone needs to follow the rules and keep the machinery of the night shift running smoothly. I think I hear the payphone ringing again. 4 rings, just like always. My hand is on the door handle now. Someone needs to answer it. Someone always answers it. The recording ends here at 5:23 a.m. as Marcus Reid turns off his phone and walks back toward the building, drawn by routines that have become stronger than his own will to survive. His car sits empty in the parking lot as the sun rises over the Texas Panhandle, another piece of evidence for the day shift to find and catalogue and eventually forget. Inside the store, 18 figures in Buc-ee's uniforms continue their eternal perimeter walk, counting steps in voices that echo through the empty aisles. The Icee machines churn in their mechanical rhythm, the coffee brews on schedule, and the beaver statue watches over it all with its painted smile and knowing eyes. And somewhere in Amarillo, a new help wanted sign is being printed, ready to attract the next traveller who needs a job and doesn't ask too many questions about why the night shift position keeps opening up.